Eric, you were the first person who texted me this morning when I woke up. And
We were texting quite early this morning. I was up early. It's it was we woke up to a different day in America. We knew we were going to be waking up to a different day. We just didn't know which day that would be. We of course all had our thoughts, but we woke up in America where uh, MAGA, Make America Great Again, um, won the White House. The Senate looks like it may also win the House,
and
and
already has the Supreme Court.
already on the Supreme Court. And also, I think very key, it appears that Donald Trump has won the popular vote, and all of those things much more broadly than I think people may have been anticipating.
So I have to say that I wasn't surprised. I was way more prepared for this than I was in 2016 when I was surprised that I think, um, but how about you?
I think disappointment. You and I and some of the Moment team maybe had been trading text a couple of weeks ago around predictions, and I don't like to make predictions, but what I told folks is I would love to wake up in that America, the America that um, really chose to lean into expertise and inclusion and not being taken advantage of, not meanness, a serious plan to bring opportunity. But we aren't in that America yet. So it was disappointing, not shocking, again, for a number of reasons that I'm sure will be discussed ad nauseum over the weeks and months. But I think that disappointment is real, and I think many people who get to spend time with us are feeling that disappointment. I think in the general public, a significant portion of Americans have woken up to an America that they weren't hoping for, and that time to mourn and grieve is important. A lot of people have spent the last 8 years working to make sure communities don't feel vulnerable or alone or isolated. And in this moment, I wrote this publicly today. In that moment, you might think the things you did had no value in this moment, but I'm here to say everybody who has done something on behalf of inclusion over the last 8 years, even if it was just a kind word to someone who felt they didn't belong, that was not for, that did not go to waste. This is not just about an election. This is about a set of values and ideas, and we will
And
continue to
science and
clarify.
science.
And science
Science is a
and
really
the
important part of
right
this.
of women to
Yeah.
have autonomy over their own bodies and health decisions. It's about a host of things, but at the end of the day, it is about remembering that there are many Americans who see our future together, and this will be a clarifying moment across the political spectrum.
And there was a clear majority of Americans who are waking up to an America they voted for. And
That's right.
that's important to remember. It's not, this wasn't by a hair. I mean, it's not by, it's not a giant landslide, but it's
That's right.
definitely, there are many people who, got to where we are today and wanted to have this day. So I think that's important to remember. But I actually
Yes.
was thinking a lot about October 7th because that was just a little over 13 months ago. And that was another day where such a dramatic change, the world changed a lot. on October 7th and then the weeks after. And I feel like we are just not, just barely a year later going through again another very dramatic transformation, it geopolitical global
Yeah.
transformation caused by
Will
this
have
election.
so many ramifications around the world, right? It
Yeah.
will, what this means for the conflict in Ukraine, what this may mean for the continuation of NATO. Um, there's just a host of global issues. But Nadine, I think you're exactly right. Those are the big issues. It starts first at home, right? It's one, just knowing we have the right to feel that deep disappointment right
Mhm.
now. Um, uh, Folks have the right to own it. We wanted to acknowledge it, but we don't want folks to isolate themselves in this moment,
And we
right?
don't want
Which is
folks to be
easy to do.
dis depressed or like be in
That's right.
despair because I guess I've been saying for weeks, if this happens, we are the checks and balances. We are, we can't go into despair. Despair doesn't help
That's right.
anyone. It doesn't help I mean, it's one thing to grieve, it's another thing to be in despair. It's another thing to I I was texting with someone today who was sitting alone in their house in the dark, you know, texting me, and I
Mm,
was like, that's that's so not what we need to be doing right now.
that's right.
It's time to have conversations. It's time to hug one another. It's time to actually and not to be in our bubbles. I think we've seen what happens when a country retreats into its own when when a polarized country people retreat into their own bubbles. Um, it's not helping anyone. um,
That's right.
yeah,
That's right.
I
I
yeah,
think that's right. You have to check in, right? You have to check in on people and see how they're doing in this moment, right? And um, authoritarians win
yes.
when they force us into isolation, when they break discourse, and that piece is so important. And it's important for a whole nother reason that people aren't thinking about, right? What we haven't talked about is that these weren't completely unfettered elections. There was a lot of disinformation, a lot of misinformation that influenced this moment. There was there were acts of political violence, right, that played out. So there are these pieces that are floating around, and if we're not in conversation with one another in this age of misinformation and
Mhm.
disinformation, the facts can get distorted, right? It can be used to polarize us even further um, at times, or prevent us from speaking up and speaking out when we need to. And so that's why places like Moment are so important in in this moment. It's not just a magazine. It's not just programming. It's a space for people to gather and to break that isolation and to get credible information and editorial that seeks to bring people together.
Well, I want to say that we had done this last issue. We had a whole project, which is online, which is looking at the allure, the appeal of strongmen. And it's
Yes,
really important. We look at strongmen from a whole different variety of ways. And but this is why I wasn't surprised because what's happening here in the United States is part of a global phenomena. There's
that's
a
right.
globally, this is the era of, liberal democracy is tarnished, has been tarnished for whatever
Yeah,
reasons in people's mind. And it's so much easier and people are so much more comfortable with strongmen. And we
yes,
have It's a kind of rule. And we were actually discussing this yesterday before the election, that there are also many people who have come to this country, many groups of people who come from countries that have authoritarian style leaders. And they bring this their comfort level with them to the United States. And we are part of the global phenomena, and we're about to
That's right.
see what's going to happen with that.
Look, we have watched France teeter on this, right? We
Yeah.
have watched this in parts of the Middle East. We have seen this in South America, Central America. It is true that this is a global phenomena, and but that can overwhelm, can it? Um, that can feel overwhelming,
Mhm.
and at the end of the day, uh, people still matter, right? People still have agency, and how are you? What are you telling folks, Nadine, right now? What are you telling them?
Well, I guess I always go back to I feel like one of the things I've said a few times today is how important it is for Americans to come back to the center. That we, whether it's center, center left, center right, but there has to be a broad center. And that's always what has made this country really work. And and in that center, there has to be this faith in the system. And we don't have that center. And I think, it's so much sexier to be like on the far right or the far left, but really that's not how um, government, and that's not how consensus, and that's not how uh, the future is built. The future is built on trust. And how do you get trust? I actually always quote George Shultz on this, the former Republican Secretary of State, um, which was trust is the coin of the realm. And if we don't have that trust, um, we just you can't find any place to make an agreement, to build an agreement, to move forward. And we have to be close enough to one another to be able to find nuance in conversation. We may not agree with each other, but if we talk somewhere in that conversation, there might be something we can agree on, and that's how agreements are built. That's how good diplomacy works. So I think that's really important. And then, for people who are on the extremes, I always think of the RBG Scalia model, friendship, because these are two people who had absolutely no judicial legal philosophy in common. However, they found a friendship based on food and based on music, and they were real friends. And it may not have changed how they voted and how they made decisions on the court, but had they both, maybe it might have. We don't really know. But at least they were able to have this connection. And I feel like it's so important for us not to like cut the people out in our lives who we disagree with.
It's I think that's right. I mean, I want to be clear too. There are lines that we can draw, but we draw them so broadly now. Look, I'm not going to have a discourse or a serious discourse with someone who says black folks aren't full human beings, or Jews aren't human, or right. Those lines are actually really clear to us.
Well, those are even so far
But
at the extreme, really.
there's
That's
so
like, yeah,
we've lost curiosity around pieces,
yeah,
and we attach people to the extremes, in ways that exaggerate, I think,
yeah.
a lot of position, and it's tough. And the truth is though, that moment may have passed. The truth is we may be such a polarized society right now that absent a strong anchor that seeks to end the sectarianism, people just won't have a place to find that kind of pragmatic, radical center, right? Or um, um,
The center is
radical.
radical. The center is radical now.
The center is a radical position in a sectarian moment, right? It's also the dangerous position. It takes a lot of work and courage to hold that, to want to govern, right? To want to build rather than destroy or burn down. To understand you can't defend something you don't love or have affection for. It's or respect for. That those are components of being a good steward for the generations to come. And I also understand the counter position to this in these types of moments that make it more difficult. If you are from a marginalized community, we know in authoritarian moments, marginalized, vulnerable communities are even more so. And I can imagine there are leaders within vulnerable communities who are thinking right now, I have to just take care of my own community. I don't have time I can't risk a more complex set of relationships. But I would just remind folks that real safety lies in a popular front, right? In a radical center. Um, uh, it takes that type of mass base
Mhm.
to anchor a democracy, and that's really the work before folks. Again, like we said, maybe at the beginning of this conversation, we will dive into the data, right? The exit data is very informative this time. Exit polling and election survey data that is coming in is going to spark 1,000 questions. How did the Black community show up? Where did it show up? How did the Jewish community show up? Where did it show up?
Where did the Latino
Where did
community show up?
Latinos, women, right? We will
Uh,
we will dissect these pieces over what happened. Was the conversation around democracy a turnoff? Was did Palestine Israel play a significant role? Was it the economy? All of these things will be debated, but at the end of the day, the piece we should understand is um, we should believe Donald Trump in terms of what he says, and know we're in a difficult moment. We should also understand, like you said, a majority of people who voted for Donald Trump, right?
and a number of those were from marginalized communities.
And well, I want to say larger percentages were from marginalized communities,
Right.
but I also don't want to distort that. Like
Okay.
a good example um, is it looks like at least an exit polling data, right, which we know can vary. It is not always accurate, but it does give us some indication of a significant portion. So, significant portion of Black men casting their votes for Donald Trump. I've seen exit poll numbers as high as 20% of Black men. But it's important when we say that to remember that means 80% of Black men voted not for Donald Trump, voted for Kamala Harris or third
Mhm.
party candidates. And so we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that at the end of the day, while there were shifts in the electorate, we have to keep them in perspective in terms of where the majority or the vision of the majority of those communities resides. But things are in motion.
Right.
People feel unstable and are reaching for the thing that feels powerful and stable. There are
Yeah.
just some folks, as Daniel Goldhagen pointed out, Hitler's willing executioners, who are down with the plan, who actually are supporters of that kind of meanness, that politics of othering. And there's a host of reasons. But at the end of the day, we don't turn it around um, by shunning those individuals, right? It opens up a path for a new form of engagement in this country. But we have rights to defend in the meantime. And uh, I hope that stays on people's radars in the day to come. Some self care, be in community, but talk to folks, right? In this era of misinformation and disinformation, it's going to get very confusing. What is real? Memories will start to fade. And it's important that we continue to kind of document what's happening, what has happened, how we got here, and look at misinformation. And then, third, folks have to be rooted in entities like Moment, in their house of worship, or um, look in their knitting or cooking club, right? It doesn't have to be political, but be in community right now. It's so important, so important.
And we have to understand, that actually, I think some of the old paradigms through which we look at society and classes and categories and marginalized communities are just different. And I think we're seeing that. We're seeing that we have evolved. We are evolving, and there's a lot to understand. And again, some of this goes back to it's a global trend. It does seem like there's like a, you know, much mistrust of mistrust of democracy. When you live in an unstable time, when you live in a period which is, for example, has such a extreme levels of anti-Semitism, that people are looking for security. And how do you balance security with rights? These are really human questions.
These are the big questions before us, and I think I think it's important that we begin to take reflection, right? Take stock. I don't care if you're in the center or on the left, or conservative. It's time for a little self-reflection, and uh, I think the new ways forward will take new dialogue and new conversations around what are the values that we hold in common, and how does that reflect in joint policy,
Yeah.
uh, um, how do people's needs get met, and those conversations are important, and we're going to have to juggle another conversation at the same time. We have a president who has said, right, he is prepared to deport millions of people from this country now. I don't know if it's logistically possible, right? But that is the threat, and the harm to communities is quite significant, right? We are at least seeing now some stories emerging of women who are dying because they can't access health care. That is not going to get better in this country. That is likely going to get harder. And we have a divided civil rights movement um, in this moment that, largely divided around the events October 7th, and the response by the Israeli government, and the weakening of that civil rights coalition in this moment uh, has left communities very vulnerable.
Mhm.
All of us very vulnerable in this moment. There's I won't call it repair, but there's a lot of new ground that needs to take place, and uh, I think it's best taken in the radical center, not on the fringes of
Yep.
society.
And while that's being built, the Radical Center, we will have a president for who, whatever you may think of him, is, we already know, is very impulsive, thrives on unpredictability, and and basically creates turmoil. And so this will have to occur, building a center in, but maybe that's what has to happen. Maybe that's, how a center gets rebuilt in our country. And
It may be, it's kind of like I don't want to make light of it, but you may be right. It's possible we just were going to get down to doing this chore until the deadline. There's no other option. We have to get down to business, and it's going to be complicated. It's harder, right, under these types of stresses
yeah,
to form those types of leadership alliances, to do that kind of broad, long arc thinking
yeah.
um, um, in these moments, but so required, so
I
required, so required. I
and
don't know how many times I can say that.
like we're forgetting. I think about this a lot. How it took so long for the Enlightenment to occur. It took
That's right.
centuries for the many of the values that we have to evolve, and it took millennia for democracy to evolve. And while we know how imperfect democracy is, we also have not yet shown that there's any other form of government that is really better in the long term. And,
That's right.
these are lessons that have been forgotten. And we've had democracy for hundreds of years now. And
That's right.
we in the United States, and we have lost something. I kept thinking last night, well, what would our founding fathers have thought about this, or de Tocqueville for that matter? I mean,
That's right.
uh, and so I feel that perhaps we will be relearning some of the lessons that we've forgotten, and that we really have to make an effort to. It's like this is a time for bringing people into that conversation and reminding
That's
people
right.
of this, because we don't want to lose but humanity works so hard to gain.
Yeah. I mean, our ancestors sacrificed so much to bring us to this point, and
And the
had to
tragedies
be so
and
resilient. Exactly.
the
It,
injustices that have already
yeah,
occurred, we don't want to go, we want to remember those lessons.
it's not the world we want to leave for our children and grandchildren and our nieces and uh, our nephews. Um, it's uh, um, it's so important that we lean in this moment, and I think leaning in is honest conversation, not about the other side, but about ourselves and where do we want to go, and uh, how are we pragmatic about that? How do we show that tangibly? That's the question of governance in this moment, and um, I think I think there's going to be amazing opportunities,
Mm.
uh, but the challenges, I just keep coming back to the challenges tonight. They're very real. I don't like to sugarcoat uh, challenges, um, but uh, for tonight, uh, uh, for tomorrow, for the remainder of the week, just ask people to check in on your family, check in on your work colleagues, um, uh, check in on your friends, see how they are doing. Um, it's a heavy moment, and those check-ins really matter, I think, right now. And uh,
What about our
I think,
friends and our, oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. What were you gonna say?
I was just say, well, what about our friends and our family who, you know, are not devastated, who
Yeah,
because what we saw last night was that this is a trend that crosses families and crosses it's not like one small part of the country. It's not just a fringe. So
that's
there
right.
are many people that we know that have different feelings about this, and I'm wondering how do we connect with that?
Yeah. I mean, I think, it may be raw in this moment, right? I don't want folks to um 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 wow, it has been that long of a day. But I don't want people to be inauthentic in that you have to be in a space where you are curious and you want to try to find joined values, even across politics. And you can't do that in a place of mourning, right? So
Mhm.
I would tell folks first to really spend time talking with friends about this moment and kind of grounding yourselves. But ultimately, at the end of the day, right, there's a segment of conservatives out there who are also looking for a different way forward.
Mhm.
And we should engage those individuals in conversations as well, uh, not in an attitude that there's room at our table, but that there's a new table that needs to be built. And
Yeah.
I think we start there. And then, of course, we have family members who have cast their votes for Donald Trump. Um, I think uh, today is probably not the day to call them. That probably won't go well for you or for them. Um, uh, but again, at the end of the day, when you do talk to those folks, try to find the value, not the issue alignment, not the political alignment. Look for the value alignment, but be clear, right? I'm not going to spend a lot of time with folks who
Right.
seek to dehumanize other individuals. That's not a legitimate conversation
But I think there's
or thing.
snarkiness. I just want to point out that there's a lot of snarkiness on both sides. And
Yes,
there's a lot, and that snarkiness is a very dehumanizing. Um,
yes. I
and
think we
we really w- that we need to that snarkiness. I know it's cool, it's funny, it's it, but it's not what building a radical center is about.
no, it exasperates this false urban rural divide. And as a black male, I actually understand that type of othering, right? Where dress, speech, where you live, um, the conditions you have to live in become kind of a caricature of prejudices. And um, uh, I think it's important to understand uh, uh, that is often dumped upon conservatives and likely also MAGA folks. It's it's not useful. That kind of sarcasm and cynicism has no use right now. It just feeds. You're feeding basically the Trump culture war machine. When you do that, he seeks that kind of polarization, that kind of othering in American society, and uh, engaging in it just keeps the cycle moving. And our job is to break the cycle, um, um,
Mm.
not to reinforce. I think that's right. That makes sense to me, and we do hear and see that at times, and then that gets framed, of course, as the snottiness of the liberal elite and a host of other uh, stereotypes. So I think that's right. We should be spending more time anyway um, uh, in conversation with folks who are looking to get out of the binaries right now. We're not going to do that by reinforcing. I agree.
And asking questions.
Yeah,
In
yeah.
asking questions in the
Being
right way.
curious, right?
Being
Yeah,
curious in the right way. Not like
yeah.
there's ways to ask questions, and we all fall into the asking questions in a way that you'll never get an answer out of that the way you asked a question. So, you know, it's just so easy to do. But I mean, having that real
Is that when
curiosity.
you're like, was that really a question? You know, when someone asks a question and you know, wait a minute, that wasn't a question. Folks know what we're talking about. Um, that's exactly right. It's that curiosity, genuine active learning, active listening to an individual is a real skill and a real skill of leadership, and you will learn something. And I often, but I wrestle with this because I also think yes, and there are. It should not come at the expense of building the radical circle, right? That is also going to be difficult enough on its own. And we really have to spend our time trying to find who those folks are. Um, uh, I want to be careful that we don't think this is something I learned from my organizing with communities to respond to hate violence and hate groups. We have to be careful of becoming folks who believe we can convert people that somehow if they just had a right conversation they would think like us, right, or be like us. It's about really finding the folks out there who are looking for that different way, and it's learning to not dehumanize um, uh, those you disagree with. I think those are the balances that will help guide us forward in this.
I think that's how, I mean, there has to be a way to, you have to ask these open questions to find the people who, I mean, people voted for one party or the other party last night for all sorts of different reasons. There wasn't,
Yeah,
there were many people, there were many people in the moderates. There were Democrats who've never voted for Republicans before and Republicans who've never voted for Democrats before. There's a lot of crossover. There's a lot of people in the middle, and there are just a lot of reasons why people made choices. So, we're talking about, you talk about building a radical center. There are a lot of people in the United States to build a radical center with. There are a lot of people who are too far on an extreme to who will never be part of a radical center. And those people, it's very hard to have a conversation with and may not be wise to have a conversation with, but there's a lot of other people who we can talk to. And
that's
those
right.
are the people that we have to focus on. And I think, we can't just make tons of assumptions about them. You have to be able to have a conversation and see what they think. And I do think the people who are closer to the center have more in common than we may think, even though they made different decisions about how to vote.
Yes, yes, I think it's right. I mean, people will justify. There's so many justifications for how folks casted um, their votes are, across the political spectrum, and we're seeing that right in some of
Mhm.
the local races versus the national,
Yeah.
right? It looks
Yeah.
very different in some places in terms of of the vote, and it's possible. It's possible we may be seeing kind of the sunset of the two political parties, two major political parties in this country, and we may see the rise of other smaller parties that become brokers, right? In this moment, hard to know. That's a complicated system in our country,
Yeah.
and but it may be that society may finally be forcing that change to come about. Um, but we better have a democracy to do it if that's going to be the case. And I think there's going to be a lot of fascinating conversations
Mm.
over the
Both
week.
parties are very weak in their
Yeah,
own ways. They've been for a long time. One party is really one man's party. The other party is very fragmented. And so these parties will, I don't know if will I be able to have more than how that will work in the United States with our system. But I do think that um, the parties, the party structure really needs to be rethought. And also it could be that we're about to enter a period of one party rule, which
yeah,
for a
for a
while,
very long time.
for a very long time.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
or at least and but again, 2 years from now there's another election. And 2 years from now things can change dramatically, at least not on the executive level, but certainly in Congress.
that's
And
right.
so, you know, that that is the beauty of the system. And if the system continues to work, that would be wonderful.
Yes. And we've seen this in Poland, right? We've seen this in Hungary. We've watched the big shifts um, happen in lots of different directions, right?
Yeah.
Germany, and again, we aren't immune to that, and we are going to do the best we can. I think. Look, as we started this conversation, this wasn't just about the elections. This is about an idea about who we are as a nation and um, who we are as a people. And I look forward to continuing that conversation, not on the extremes of American society, but in that radical center where people really want to govern and want what's best for their neighbors. That continues to be my America. Uh, uh, we do not have to be the majority to see that America happen. We just simply have to find each other.
Mhm. Amen.
Man, look, great to hang out with you, and always great to talk. And I look forward uh, to what we will continue to do, conversations we will have this year and in the coming year. And um,
Thank you.
grateful to everyone out there who continues to be courageous enough to lean into this space.